Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. Before we jump into the presentation, I'd like to point out some of the features of the webinar platform that we're using. We plan to have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please submit your questions by typing them in the Ask the Question box, which appears under the slides being displayed on the screen. Also, I want to point out the Resources tab located near the top right of your screen, where you'll find several resources related to today's topic. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, who is Charlie Kraus. He's a Senior Product Marketing Manager for Limelight. He has over 25 years of technology industry experience, largely in the data and storage networking, product management, and marketing areas. And currently his focus has primarily been on Limelight's video delivery and cloud security services. And with that, Charlie, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Diana. Okay, good day, everybody. I'm hoping you're going to find this very informative. This is basically a thought leadership type of webinar. I'm coming at this from the perspective of working for Limelight as a CDN vendor. And everything I say about a low latency video and delivery will apply broadly to most of the CDN services that are out there. You know, there's an awful lot of them, but most of them offer those very similar kind of technology options for delivering video streams. So it's really going to focus on the amount of confusion that's arising from so many low latency options for you, and sort of the way use cases are changing and the way people watch video. So we don't have to belabor what happened in the last year about live sports and the increase in people watching live streams more than anything. And a lot of these changes are going to be permanent. So we find that as people have gotten used to more and more of their daily activities going online and new ways of watching sports and some new services that are coming up, the good side of it is it's giving content distributors a lot more options now and ways of delivering better experiences to their audiences. And that's where these different low latency technologies come in. So my goal is to clearly position and differentiate the major differences between these, and how do you pick which one is right. So we'll make it basically a use case discussion and why you would pick one over another. Monetization is a big deal around this. So a couple of challenges. As more and more, as live sports are coming back, small audiences starting to appear. Rights. This is a time of year when a lot of the rights management to stream big events for 2021 are coming around. And what's increasing a lot, besides the usual suspects in terms of the big sports networks and so forth, a lot of the big social media platforms have been getting into this game last year and the year before, but it's really stepped up now, and they're competing for rights for some events. In fact, in the fall, there was a major soccer tournament that was only available streaming. It wasn't broadcast traditionally. We're going to see more of that take place. So what that means is, with more competition for bidding on the rights and more distributors out there, is they're going to work extra hard to try to differentiate what they offer to the customer, to their viewers. So the two bigger challenges is, one, with the very lowest latency, is this idea of integrating viewer interactivity with it. And the other is matching broadcasts. So everybody's familiar with the spoiler issue. You're watching at home on a broadcast, or back in the day in a sports bar, and you might send a social media text out about a play you just saw, and to a friend of yours that's watching the stream, and he could be 30 seconds or a minute delayed. He hasn't seen it yet. It's an inconvenience, and it's a spoiler, but that's one good reason to try to get the latency down, at least to match broadcast. And fortunately, there's a lot of ways of doing that. But interactivity is coming on for use cases like online casinos or online auctions, a lot of online activity where you want to maybe have chat with your audience or have the audience be able to interact with each other. And to do that, you need real time. So we're going to talk about how to do sub-second latency streaming and how to integrate voice chat and some of the applications people are finding for this. So I'm going to start with what I call the latency spectrum, or sometimes I call it the latency continuum. You can really break it down into sort of three major categories. So on the left here in orange is the standard OTT delivery that most of us view on, whether it's HLS or Dash. Sort of the typical way this is delivered is with 10-second chunks, and they do a few chunk buffering. So it usually results in something like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, sometimes even a minute of latency there for these streams. You can tune them down. You can use smaller chunks and get the latency down sometimes as low as about 10 seconds. But this is typical for where you're not going to have interactivity. It's more lean back. It's live linear, or it's just turning on sports or just watching a movie, even if it's not live, watching something on demand where latency may not be critical. And it's the pervasive way that it's done. One of the things about HLS and Dash is between all the CDNs that are active globally, there's massive capacity to deliver this kind of traffic. So to get rid of the spoiler issue and to improve latency, what you're hearing a lot about now is low latency, which is like they call it low latency CMAP or low latency HLS and Dash. And this is a little bit different than the HTTP streaming. So this is using something called chunk transfer encoding, and I'll talk to that in a couple of slides when I get to this. But it's a way of delivering traffic that's a little bit different. So you're delivering segments, but with micro chunks that maybe is 1 or 200 milliseconds long. And I'll talk about how that can get the latency down. But this is really designed to match broadcast. So you can get the latency in the range from about 3 seconds to 7 seconds, and most traditional broadcast or cable delivery around the world falls into that range in those single digits, and you can easily tune this to match that. And then where you want interactivity, so it's actually real time and everybody is seeing everything at the same time, is real time streaming. The dominant protocol for this is WebRTC, which is Web Real-Time Communications. There are, on my last look, something like half a dozen services that offer WebRTC streaming globally and at pretty good scale. A lot of them are the usual big CDN delivery services that do it, but many of them are just new services that are focusing just on this low latency delivery, and they may use a bigger CDN as their distribution arm. So each of these has their place in terms of where the latency falls. But the sub-second, a lot of people don't believe it, but it really is sub-second. In testing that we've done with our own service and in testing with others, anywhere around the world to anywhere else around the world, we've seen it typically in the range of 300 to 500 or 600 milliseconds. So it's a real thing, and it works well. So let's go back again to what a typical workflow looks like. So I have a little diagram. This is probably any CDN vendor would have a similar diagram to this. The two popular ways of ingesting would be RTMP, an RTMP stream. For some of the lower latency, SRT is another up-and-coming contribution protocol that's designed really for low latency that you're going to hear a lot about. And again, I mentioned you can get your latency maybe down to 10 seconds with the smallest chunks. But the advantage here is it gives you two possibilities for ingesting. For companies that feel comfortable with doing their own encoding and packaging of the video, they can just simply use a pull model. They just, the CDN will pull the streams from their origin and just deliver them. They're just taking advantage of the CDN's global infrastructure to deliver video streams. A lot of providers don't have the expertise to do the encoding or don't want to, so they will just send a single RTMP stream for in. And then in the CDN, we'll do the transmuxing and the transcoding. So we'll convert it into HLS or dash or smooth streaming. Can transcode it from, if they send in a very high bit rate, you can transcode it down to a ladder of lower bit rates to be used with adaptive bit rate encoding. And this is really well tried and true in how the vast majority of streams are delivered today. It negotiates with the end clients when they log on about the internet connection and what they negotiate was the highest bit rate that it can support. So it always delivers the best video quality. Now the low latency side, when I mentioned CMAF, HLS, and dash, this is where we're sending the microsegments down. So the reason this is so fast, and this can get down in the single digits of seconds, is that unlike standard OTT, where you receive whole segments and buffer a number of them and then pass it on to the player, which is the basic contributor to the latency, with this method of chunk transfer encoding, a segment doesn't have to be completely sent before the player will start playing the microsegment. So as soon as a segment arrives, the player can start pulling those microsegments out and displaying them even before the entire segment's been received. So this is how it can really cut down on the amount of latency there. So in testing we've done with partners, about 3 seconds is about as low as you can get here practically, with network conditions. And again, depending on some settings, you can tune that to be a good match for your broadcast. The other thing that is coming popular with this is another way to do the delivery. So very, very often a pull workflow is common where the CDN pulls the traffic on request from the origin. But one of the things we found in the last year, with especially the major sports events, is if you take like a soccer or football match and it's in the final minutes and the score is tied, you suddenly, it blows up over social media. A lot of people try to log in and watch that. And so the origin can be overwhelmed with all these requests for streams. So an option is something called live push that's becoming popular, where the content provider only has to provide a single stream, a single set of chunks, and the CDN will receive that in their ingest server, and the CDN will take care of replicating that and distributing that to even the millions of clients out there that are logged in. So it's a single stream delivery no matter how many actual clients. And so the obvious advantages of this is, one is they don't have to have an expensive link to the CDN to send all the streams. They don't have to have as heavy a duty origin server infrastructure because they don't have to deliver millions of streams. So it saves them a lot of money, and it just allows them to really push the whole burden of the distribution and replication of these streams to the CDN, and then the CDN takes care of it. So we're going to see more and more of that. So you have the option with this of either just we pull it from you if you have the infrastructure to handle it, or you can just push it to us. And so right now, in terms of standards, the low latency dash is fairly solid, and you're starting to see that come up. On the HLS side, the standards are still somewhat in flux now. There's negotiating. So there's really two. There's what we call an industry standard community version, and then there's an Apple version. And the community version is a little more stable right now. The Apple version there's still a lot of discussion going on, but during 2021, we expect that both versions of HLS will become fairly common to use. So this is the live push workflow I mentioned. I'm not going to talk about, I don't want to repeat a lot of this again, but just another option for, saving money on getting the distribution out and making it easy for everybody. So sub-second, so I mentioned WebRTC is definitely the dominant technology that is coming into play on this. So one thing I want to mention is WebRTC is a standard. This technology was developed by Google back in around 2012. The most popular usage of it back then was the Google function called Hangouts. It allowed groups of people to have live chats with each other. And if you ever used Hangout, you might have noticed that there's very, very little latency, if any, noticeable at all. And you can be doing Hangout with people anywhere in the world, and it's like you're in the same room. But the problem with the initial versions of this was it was like a peer-to-peer. So you'd have maybe like 50 people that would be on, and they would share the little video segments and audio segments, so they didn't have to send, it wasn't one-to-many. But that doesn't scale well if you want to think of like major sports events where you want to be able to support hundreds of thousands or even millions of streams. So today's WebRTC implementations are all one-to very, very many kind of distribution. And so you're just sending individual streams out to each of the end users with adaptive bitrate, so you can tune it for the best picture quality for them. And all of these will, depending on the implementation, will scale very well. Because the latency is so low, you can integrate chat with this. So some of the solutions use a side channel with WebSocket, and they use chat with that. Some have built in the capability right in this video stream itself to send chat and data. And some of the things we've seen used is things like doing polling. If you think of some of those use cases I mentioned of like online auctions or casino gambling where people are playing the same game but they're different places, you want not only low latency but consistent latency to everybody. So everybody sees the turn of a card at the same time, where they can bid on an auction with people that maybe are live at the auction and they're right there. Sports betting is starting to become accepted in more parts of the world where the sports networks are using analytics to offer bets during an event. Like when soccer team's on offense, they might offer a bet, hey, are they going to score a goal on this try? And it's these quick bets that you have like really just seconds to respond and make a bet. And there could be people at the match using the same app you are. So obviously, if you're remote, you need to have basically real-time latency to be able to compete with people that are at the event. Another one that's popular that's just started, the NFL offers something called Watch Together. So it's an app that I think up to like 6 people that may normally gather together to watch a football game or some sporting event can watch together on an app. So they're sending the video to them, and they actually deliberately put in a latency of about 20 seconds on the video, just because when they're in this app, those 10 people are their only source of it will be that app. But they use WebRTC that enable them to do chatting, either audio chat or texting chat to each other, and that'll be real time. So it's a mixture of the two technologies, and I'm starting to see more of these sort of watch together apps popping up. So it's a good hybrid use of tuned latency and super low latency. So how monetization impacts. So if you're doing one of these applications that needs real-time streaming and it has to be fast, one of the challenges is the reason it's fast is because it's using UDP transfer. There's no buffering. There's no handshake and acknowledgments. UDP is you just send the streams and you do your best, and the quality of service comes from adaptive bitrate to deliver the best picture. But because the latency is so quick, if you try to do server-side customized ad insert or watermarking or things like that at the edge, you will start pushing that latency out of the sub-second realm. So most of the time, these applications are monetizing based on the app itself. So if it's gaming or it's auctions, it's a commission. If it's a trivia game, you subscribe to play, right? Or there's advertising that are built in with it. So your monetization's coming from that. But if you have a major sports event, obviously you have to be able to monetize, because you may have ad supported and you may have subscriptions. But if you're ad supporting, you have to be able to insert ads. So one of the nice things about this sort of 5-second-ish matching broadcast is that those few seconds are a good budget to be able to do things at the edge, like personalized ad inserts or watermarking or DRM or other enhancements like that. On the live linear side, then, when you have, 20 seconds or 45 seconds, then it's plentiful. But the low latency versions of this, what they're really doing is they're taking advantage of the large global capacity to deliver HLS and dash traffic and leveraging that. So this is a robust, really rock solid way to deliver to audiences of millions with matching the latency of the broadcast and being able to do that. So just as a summary before we get into any Q&A, so what we talked about is streaming across this latency spectrum of tune standards that we have today of sort of 10 seconds or more. And again, this is for the more laid back live linear or and if it's not live, movies on demand, almost all of that's delivered by either, if it's an Apple device, HLS, if it's streaming devices to a smart TV, this is almost usually dash. The low latency versions of this with GMAF is coming onto its own as the standards firm up this year, and during 2021 you're going to start seeing more and more of this. And then what's really surprising me now is with WebRTC technology, I know because I manage the marketing for Limelight for this business, is I'm always surprised at the types of use cases I see. I imagine the obvious ones of the sports betting and gambling and things like that, but we've seen really interesting ones. I'll just throw a couple quick examples out. Is in preparing for the Olympics, a lot of athletes for many sports don't want to congregate together for some of the trials. So one country's Olympic diving and swim teams the athletes are just at the pool where they normally do their practices anyhow, and they're using this real-time WebRTC technology to stream their dives or their synchronized swimming back to a panel of judges. So the country has a centralized, all the judges will be on a Zoom-like facility watching all the divers on multiple screens, and they're getting a feed that's in real time of a diver entering the water or the synchronized swimmer, so the judges can judge their performance from one location, and the divers could be really anywhere in their country that they typically work out, and that's working very nicely for them. Scientific exploration, underwater exploration where we have a surface ship and you have an underwater drone. The scientists that are watching the drone and directing it are typically not on that ship. They could be anywhere else, and they're watching a video feed from the drone. But without very low latency, if they're a minute behind the stream and they say, "Oh, could you stop the sub there?" or "I want you to turn 2 degrees north," the sub is already a minute past that point, so they need to see this in real time. And so they're using WebRTC technology to send the video from the drone right to these scientists that are anywhere to direct the pilot on the ship and what to do. All right, so I'm going to move over to having some Q&A. Reminder, as you think of questions, just enter them. Again, this is being recorded. You're going to get an email with a link to it, and you have the resources up there. So let's start taking a couple of questions. Somebody's asked about SRT. Yeah, SRT, this is being driven by High Vision, and I think there's about 50-something companies part of this consortia. This is a really good idea. It's a newer protocol that's designed for the distribution side of the workflow. It's not a distribution protocol. It's a contribution protocol. So this is probably over time might replace RTMP as the most popular way to ingest streams, especially when you're trying to do anything at low latency. So right now it's a lot of interoperability testing going on, development and so forth. It's on my roadmap to do. I'm just sort of watching the market. Another question came in. Oh, he says, when you talked about standard HLS and dash, you mentioned there's a limitation on how small you want to make the chunk sizes. Why is that? Because it is TCP delivered. You get to this point where if you go to a chunk size that's less than just a couple of seconds, what you find is the savings in buffering time, because the buffer chunks are smaller, um, is sort of counteracted by the fact that when you're doing HTTP streaming, as you send the chunks, you get acknowledgments for them. And as the chunk size gets smaller, the number of chunks you have to send per minute. And so the chattiness of the protocol almost negates the benefits of the lower latency is one effect of this. The other is the smaller you make these chunks and the lower you make the buffer, in regions where connectivity is not high or the quality isn't very high, you risk starting to get rebuffering going on. So when you're trying to play around with tuning, you really have to look in different regions and do some testing and find out what the optimal small chunk size is. You find maybe in some areas of the world where internet connectivity is really rock solid, that you might be able to go down to maybe a 2 or 1 second chunk. But in many parts of the world, you may have to be, 5 or seconds or more. So those are both reasons for that. That's another. More about CMAF. So I only briefly talked about it. So CMAF has been around for a while, and one of the reasons for it, even before low latency, is if you're a provider of streams, you often are encoding twice. You're encoding HLS, then you're encoding dash. Two most popular. You might even also be encoding MSS, but that's kind of disappearing. And so you have to do it twice. If you are delivering like on-demand traffic, you would have a library of HLS encoded and dash encoded video. So CMAF was an attempt to come up with, is there any way we can encode once and deliver by either HLS or dash? So that's what that has come into. So this allows you to encode it as CMAF, and it's a container. And what this allows is for HLS and dash to both receive video bits from the container and read their manifests, even though there's differences between HLS and dash, especially with Apple, when the manifest itself, both can read it. So this way you can encode once and deliver with both. And this same concept carries over to low latency HLS and low latency dash. So you have low latency CMAF. So it's kind of deep and beyond the topic for today, but there's many, if you just Google that topic, you'll see lots of deep, good blogs and so forth around that technology. Last question, and then we'll be out, is does Live Push help in any way with multi-CDN? Good question. In fact, it does. So one of the things that almost everybody that does big live events uses multi-CDN, just because you can't have anything go wrong, and many use 3, 4, even 5 of them. But the problem they have is, how do I, that's a lot of organizing to manage getting traffic from, having to ingest it into different CDNs. So one way to simplify that is, if you have maybe one of your CDN partners is most trusted, is with Live Push, what you typically can do is all the CDNs can get at that. A lot of CDNs allow other CDNs to come in and get at their ingest server. So if you Live Push it in, multiple CDNs can then pull it from that ingest server and be the multi-CDN source going out. Sort of depends on your feelings about which CDN partner you would use to do that, but that is something that is a way to do that we have. So I know that we have at a time right now, so I just want to thank everybody for joining. I hope this has been informative and that you learned something, and we look forward to having you at another time. The questions I didn't get to, I will respond by email within the next day or so, personally to the person that left it, and just generally put the answers to that in the email that we send out. So I thank you very much.